What's up, class? Today we're looking at Chapter 1 Mass Communication, Culture, and Media Literacy. So, jumping right in, today we have three main points. Our first main point, we're going to look at what mass communication is. Our second main point, we're going to be talking about culture and mass communication. And then our third main point, we're going to tie everything up in a pretty bow with media literacy skills. Okay, so you might be wondering what mass communication is, right? Well, before we really build up to what mass communication is, let's look at the very basic definition of communication. So, communication is the process of creating shared meaning through the transmission of a message from a source to a receiver. Okay, and we're going to break this down a little bit more here in a second. But what I really want you to remember out of the whole definition is that communication is the process of creating shared meaning. Now, we got to break a few things down before we really define mass communication. So, I want to introduce you to some terminology that we'll use throughout the class that will really help you in the course. Okay, so the first definition is feedback, and most of these are going to be on our quiz. Feedback is the response to a given communication. This could be verbal or nonverbal. So, that is going to be feedback, right? If you're in a conversation with someone, maybe you like wink at them. That's a nonverbal feedback response. Then we have encoding, which is transforming ideas into an understandable sign, symbol, or system, right? So, like when Miss Brown read chapter 1 of our textbook, and then I encoded it and put it into a PowerPoint. And then decoding is interpreting the sign and symbol systems, right? So, what you're decoding from my presentation. Now, noise is a term that I will use a ton in this class. So, noise is anything that interferes with successful communication. So, that could be like right now, maybe your TV's on in the background, or maybe your phone's ringing, your iWatch, all these different things, right? That's just noise. Right now, it's my dog because it's storming, so he is like barking. You guys could hear him bark. So those things would be considered noise. Anything that interferes with successful communication. However, this could also be internal or external. So it's important to note that noise isn't just external, it can also be internal. Like maybe you have a headache, maybe your stomach hurts, things like that. Maybe you have to use the bathroom. All these things are considered noise in communication. All right, then we have medium, which is the vehicle by which messages are conveyed. So the medium right now is online, right? You guys are taking the class online. So that is our medium. That's how I'm conveying these messages for our class. And then mass medium is a medium that carries messages to many people, right? So maybe TV, right? Many people. All right. So now that we have broke down communication, right? Hopefully you feel a little bit better with that, right? We said communication is the process of creating shared meaning through the transmission of a message from a source to a receiver. Now let's really go back and hit on mass communication, which is still the process of creating shared meaning. However, it's between the mass media and their audiences. Okay, so that's the difference in the definition there between the mass media and their audiences. And then it's important whenever we talk about mass communication, it's also important for us to define inferential feedback. Inferential feedback is the mass communication process. Feedback is indirect rather than direct. It's inferential. Okay. So, what is inferential? Well, to infer is to judge or guess from some evidence. Okay. So, mass communication is inferential, it's indirect rather than direct. Okay. So, I know that's kind of confusing. So, hopefully, this graph might help you a little bit more if you're kind of a visual person. So, here is your source, right? And like the actual message that's going to go out. So, say we have a television show, right? So, say we've got a television show series, and we've been watching Survivor. So say we have Survivor, right? Well, Survivor is filmed and it's produced and it's edited and all these things before it goes out to the audiences, right? To the public. So, but it's also going out to many different publics, right? So, sorry, I have a screen up top if you see me look up. So, like, maybe it's going to go out to Kentucky or someone else in Missouri, right? All these different audiences in different demographics. So could be the same message, but it can be interpreted differently through all these different populations. But what is important to note here is that there's delayed inferential feedback, right? So whenever we're having like a one-on-one conversation, I'm getting feedback from that other person immediately, right? I can kind of tell if they're bored with through eye contact. I can tell all these different things whenever I'm just interacting with someone one on one. However, with mass communication, that feedback is delayed, right? You're not going to get the results from what your audience thought about that Survivor episode, until it's already aired and been seen and all these things. So that feedback is delayed, right? So hopefully that is something that kind of helps you there. Now, so I just kind of compared it to interpersonal a little bit, but let's do it even more because it really helps you kind of understand like the difference of mass communication versus other communication. So, when we think of interpersonal communication, right, between one person and another, right, two people, the messages are highly flexible, meaning you can change it in real time, right? Even when I'm presenting in real time, I can see what my audience's disposition is and I can actually change my lecture. However, for this one, I cannot. Like, I'm going to upload it, it's recorded. That's exactly what it is. Like, there's no changing it. Hopefully, you enjoy it, right? So, interpersonal communication is highly flexible, whereas in mass communication, it is messages are inflexible, right? Mechanically produced, right? I'm mechanically producing this lecture. I can't, once it's done, it's done. It's concrete. I can go back and re-record later once I get feedback from you guys, but it is not flexible, right? So hopefully you can see the difference there. Also, it's interpersonal is between just one person and another, so two people, and mass communication is usually between an organization and a large audience, right? And then important to note that in interpersonal communication, feedback is immediate and direct, whereas with mass communication, feedback is delayed and inferential, right? We just looked at that with the Survivor example. And then lastly, the difference between interpersonal and mass communication is that results are flexible and personally relevant in interpersonal. However, in mass communication, the results are constrained by almost all aspects of the communication situation, right? Um, in that context. Okay, so hopefully you feel a little bit more aware of like what mass communication is as we are starting our class off. But now let's switch gears into communication and culture, okay? Because that is such a huge part of this. Okay, so culture. What is culture? It's the learned behavior of members on a given social group. So the creation and maintenance of a common culture occur through communication, including mass communication, right? So how does this all connect? Well, so everybody knows what these pictures are, right? So a lot of you will know this is Disney. The second picture is McDonald's, right? And then the third one is the flag, right? The American flag. So all of these things are part of our US culture, right? However, it's also been influenced in our brain through mass communication, right? We see these things in advertisements. We see these things in media all the time, all these different things. So it's important to kind of see the connection of mass communication in our culture and in different cultures as well. Okay, so also staying on communication and culture, culture limits our options and provides useful guidelines for behavior. Okay, so an example of that would be social proximity, right? So we know usually how far we should stand in regard to another person based on culture. So some cultures, whenever they greet, they don't like shake hands or anything like us. Some of them will actually, bow and different things like that. So all of these things have been ingrained through our culture. Also, another example is distinctions between right and wrong, appropriate versus inappropriate, attractive versus unattractive, right? So, in American culture, all of these things are going to be different than in potentially another culture. And all of these norms are reiterated through mass communication, social media, through TV, all these different channels really tell us what our culture is. So that was the kind of the question there for the class. How does culture do all this, right? How does it do it? Well, it does it through communication, right? That's how we learn. Okay, so just a few more things of terminology here. I think the only one on your quiz here is dominant culture, but dominant culture is the culture that seems to hold sway with most people. That which is normative, also called mainstream culture, is also known as dominant culture. Then we have body positive movement, which is the cultural push to define beauty as coming in all colors, shapes, and sizes. Hope I do think that has been something that we're really that U.S. is better with lately. But I mean, still sometimes you see, there's a lot of different opinions on that. All right, and then next we have bonded culture, which is groups with specific but dominant cultures, also called co-cultures, right? So little cultures within a big culture. Okay, so just some questions for you guys, just to kind of get your brain thinking. So, and then some of this does relate to what you're going to be working on for some of our class activities. But what is your personal media use, right? What's the first thing you checked this morning on your phone, on your computer, and how much time did you spend on it? How much time are you spending on this a day, right? Um, what platforms are you using the most? I want you guys to really, since you're in this class, I really want you to become critical consumers of information and really start being mindful of like how much you're using your phone, how much you're using certain platforms. If you're not using them, just like get rid of the app. I am all about social media, but I do think there's a balance. So I really want you guys to really start thinking about your media usage and how it affects you. All right, in the media influence, how do you think the media you consume shapes your opinions, your taste, or even how you're viewing the world as a whole? I know it's deep stuff here, but these are the kind of like real questions that hopefully I'm going to help prompt you with this semester for this class. So, really start thinking about those things. And then cultural connections. Have you ever discovered a new culture or tradition through media? What was it? And then just kind of like answer that to yourself. So, hopefully, these questions can kind of prompt you there. All right. And so, media literacy is our last main point here. Culture and communication are inseparable, and mass communication is powerful, pervasive, and complex form of communication. We really don't have time to go over these two, so I'm just going to kind of skim over that here. I only have 15 minutes on my record. I'm sorry. But I really want you guys to be critical consumers of information. And that's pretty much what the 7 elements of media literacy is really talking about. It's how it's given you these 7 different elements to really, hey, you're media literate, to like look at yourself and be like, hey, I'm being media literate. I am looking at media. I am understanding it and all these things. All right, and then the last definition I really want you guys to look at is third person effect, which is the assumption that others are influenced by media messages, but we are not. I believe that one is on your quiz as well. And then this is all about fake news. Unfortunately, I'm out of time, but definitely look at those last few slides there if you get a chance. All right, let me know if you guys have any questions.